Hi everyone, and welcome to another video. In this video, I'll be talking about some of the early indicators of abusive relationships. Many people who are or used to be in abusive relationships will say that things weren't always the way that they are, that things were great in the beginning. People who work with and advocate for domestic violence survivors will tell you that abusive relationships rarely start out with violence. They start out with manipulation tactics and gradually escalate to become more severe over time. It is usually a lot easier to leave abusive relationships in the early stages than later on when the abuse becomes more severe. And that is why it is so important to recognize early warning signs of abusive relationships. Abusers tend to select their victims pretty carefully. Usually, they will look for victims who have low self-esteem, limited confidence, those who are more empathetic, those who struggle with setting boundaries, those who are socially isolated. Basically, they're just looking for vulnerabilities that they can exploit for their own purpose. Here are some of the most common warning signs of abusive relationships. First of all, we have love bombing. This is a manipulation tactic in which the abuser showers excess amounts of affection and attention on another person. The love bomber will make a person feel very special, loved, and cared for. They'll show a version of themselves that is not real. Once they feel like they've got the person, they might pull away, which may cause confusion and hurt feelings and compel the victim to reach out. And it leads to this sort of push and pull situation where the abuser will shower their love and attention and then pull away. And then the victim will reach out to gain their favor. And then the whole cycle sort of repeats again and again. Alternatively, the abuser will treat a person very well as long as they behave in the way that the abuser wants them to behave, and then turn cruel and demeaning, angry if the other person doesn't. They might also punish the victim through screaming, mind games, accusations of selfishness. They might cut off communication. Some of the specific things that love bombers will do is give lavish gifts to their target. They'll constantly express the need to be with that person. They will send excessive numbers of texts and make excessive phone calls. They'll attempt to push their victim into committing very early in a relationship, like within a few weeks of meeting. They'll make promises of the future when they know very little about you and very soon after meeting you. If you encounter someone who is doing these things and you feel like things are moving way too quickly, that's generally your red flag. Another thing I want to add while I'm talking about love bombing is this. Love bombing is a very common tactic that sex traffickers use on their victims. Traffickers will use love bombing to create this loving, dependent sort of relationship with their victims before trafficking them. I also want to note that women and girls are also used in trafficking operations to build friendships with other women and girls before trafficking them. There are numerous examples of this happening across Canada where traffickers will recruit girls and women through social media, dating apps, at schools, at malls and parties, and try to build that connection and coerce women and girls into sex trafficking. When you first meet someone you're very attracted to, it can be very easy to dismiss love bombing acts as just, they're being romantic, they're just being thoughtful. But this is a very deliberate act, and generally it doesn't last. If you think you're experiencing love bombing, be firm and let the person know when they're doing or saying something that is making you uncomfortable. Don't hesitate to express your boundaries. And if they keep pushing your boundaries, it is best to let them know that it's not going to work out and block all further contact. Alright, other abusive behaviors to look out for include attempts to isolate you from your friends and family. Another indicator of abusive relationships is financial control. The abuser will encourage their victim to quit their job so that they can take care of them, or they'll demand that the victim hands over their earnings from their job. The goal is to keep the victim financially dependent on the abuser. When the victim is financially dependent on their abuser, it can also be harder to escape from abusive relationships, and abusers know that. Another indicator of abusive relationships is when the abuser reacts very negatively when you assert your boundaries. They may react with anger, aggression, hostility, threats of violence, actual violent acts like punching a wall. They might make you feel guilty or selfish. They might try to convince you that by having and asserting your boundaries, you did something wrong. But that's not the case. Every single human being should have boundaries. Gaslighting is another abusive behavior. Gaslighting is when the abuser does something wrong to the victim and then blames the victim for it, or tells the victim that they're exaggerating and making a big deal out of nothing. The gaslighter might deny that the event occurred at all. Another thing that gaslighters do is try to create doubt in your mind about what actually happened. This is the primary intention in gaslighting, is to make the victim doubt their version of events that occurred. One of the reasons people gaslight is to avoid accountability and keep doing whatever it is that they're doing without having to ever actually answer for it. Alright, moving on. Another sign of an abusive relationship is sexual coercion. Now, this can take many forms, such as repeatedly badgering one's partner for sex until they give in, or at least until they get sick of hearing it and take off. Threats to leave you if you don't put out, using their position to intimidate you and coerce you into having sex with them, tries to guilt you into having sex when you don't want to, or tries to guilt you into sexual acts that you are not comfortable partaking in. Sexual coercion is such a huge issue. It can happen within the context of casual dating as well as marriages and relationships. It can also happen in schools and workplaces. If your partner or another person is trying to coerce you into sexual activity, my suggestion is to firmly and clearly say no and remove yourself from that person's presence if you feel safe to do so. If you are experiencing sexual coercion within the context of a marriage or a relationship, talk to your partner about how that is making you feel. It's important for your partner to understand that in order for you to have a healthy relationship, your partner needs to respect your boundaries. Couples therapy or counseling can also be helpful. More importantly, there is nothing wrong with saying no if you don't want to engage in a sexual activity. There is nothing wrong with changing your mind. There is nothing wrong with starting and then stopping midway because you are scared or uncomfortable or whatever else that it is you might be feeling at the moment. The same thing goes for someone who is in a position of power, such as an employer or a senior level colleague or a professor or a teacher. It is best to be as clear and direct as possible and refuse any sexual activity that you are not comfortable with and walk away. In a school or workplace, typically there's already laws and policies that exist that prohibit sexual coercion and threats, intimidation, harassment. So if a person is engaging in sexual coercion in the workplace or at schools, it is worth making a complaint about that conduct because they can keep doing that to you or to another person. If your school or workplace refuses to take any action, you might also consider making a formal complaint with the police. If someone you're dating casually is sexually coercing you, refuse firmly and leave if it's safe to do so. Most importantly, I think it's best not to engage with this person any further because this person feels a sense of entitlement. They're refusing to take no for an answer the first, second, third, fourth time you say no. There is no telling how safe you are in this person's presence, so consider carefully whether this person is worth keeping in contact with. The last thing I will say is this: sexual coercion falls under the broad umbrella of sexual assault. Depending on the situation and your relationship with the person, how the incident played out, where you live, sexual assault charges can be pressed when a person commits sexual coercion. A lot of people don't realize this, so what I'm going to do is leave 2 articles on sexual coercion in the description bar. Alright, another sign of abuse is attacks on your self-esteem. So this can again take different forms, such as putting you down, dismissing your intelligence and your achievements, insulting your appearance, making you feel like the abuser is the only one who will ever love you. The point of this is to break down one's self-esteem, to make one more vulnerable and increase their dependence on the abuser. In dating, one related term is negging. This is where a person will give you a backhanded compliment or outright insult you in order to get your attention. People who neg tend to be very insecure and to have poor luck in dating, so they will deliberately undermine their person of interest and hope that that person will give them a chance. If you encounter this behavior, it is best not to give this person the time of the day because this type of person is likely to exploit any vulnerability that they see. Okay, the last sign of an abusive relationship I will be talking about is controlling behavior. This includes controlling your choices, your actions, your behaviors, telling you how to dress, what you can or can't wear, when you can go out, who you can go out with, how to do your hair, how not to do your hair, how much you can spend, what type of activities you can participate in, monitoring your activities through texts and phone calls, telling you how much or how little makeup to put on, what kind of content you can or cannot post on social media, telling you to give up the things that they disapprove of. The list is actually endless when it comes to controlling behaviors. And I know I said relationships earlier, but I've seen people talking about controlling behaviors occurring where two parties don't even officially agree to be a couple yet, but there's already signs of controlling behavior. Within heterosexual relationships, there are some abusive men who will demand subservience as a show of respect. In some cases, a man might even use religion to justify controlling major aspects of her life. These men tend to hold on to rigid, traditional gender roles and struggle to cope with the social changes that are happening right now, particularly changes in women's rights and their upward social mobility. So while they're talking about respect when they demand subservience, what they're really looking for is control. Another thing that abusers will sometimes do is they will deliberately look for partners that are significantly younger than they are, because younger individuals tend to not recognize the kinds of warning signs that I'm talking about in this video. Abusive individuals who specifically target people who are much younger are counting on their victims' inexperience and lack of knowledge to prey on them. In their mind, a younger victim is easier to mold and shape to their liking. Another thing they're counting on is that a younger victim might be too afraid, too uncertain to report the abuse that they experience. Many abusive relationships develop gradually, like I said earlier. And very often, early warning signs tend to get dismissed because it's not violent physical assault. However, these other forms of abuse, emotional, psychological, financial, sexual abuse, these things can be extremely damaging in their own ways. By the time abuse escalates to violence, if the abuser feels like they're losing control over their victim, the abuse can become life-threatening. Recognizing early indicators of an abusive relationship can help you make safer choices for yourself. That's all for today's video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!